The most curious and dangerous part of your crisis is not the emptiness it causes, but what it hides. Imagine that, for your entire life, you have been carrying a treasure of incalculable value. But out of fear or ignorance, you have kept it locked in the darkest cellar of your soul. This treasure is your shadow, the sum of all the power, creativity, passion, and vitality that you were forced to repress to fit into the world. Your midlife crisis is not a sign that you are breaking. It is the sound of the treasure, which has become too powerful, bursting down the cellar doors. What you feel as a collapse is, in fact, your most authentic strength desperately trying to come to light. This journey we are about to embark on is not for the faint of heart. It is a conscious descent to find this hidden gold in your own darkness. If you feel there is more to your life than the gray routine you are living, if a part of you cries out for a meaning that money and success cannot buy, then you are in the right place. This is not just a video, it is a portal. To cross it, do the following. Subscribe to this channel, not as a spectator, but as an initiate on this journey of self-discovery. Give it a like as an act of intention, a signal to your unconscious that you are ready to listen, and leave a comment with the word awakening, so we can identify those who are truly committed to this crossing. Do this now, because what comes next will change the way you see yourself forever. Society has sold us a dangerously simplistic narrative about human life. We are born, we grow up, we study, we build a career, we start a family, and around 40 or 50, we reach a plateau of stability where we are supposed to reap the fruits of our labor. The midlife crisis, within this logic, is treated as an anomaly, a pathological deviation, a system failure. It's the man who buys a sports car, the woman who abandons everything. Clichés that serve to ridicule and diminish one of the most sacred and necessary processes of the human psyche. The first and most crucial truth to be told is this: what you are experiencing is not a crisis, in the sense of a mistake. It is a metanoia, a Greek term that Jung loved, which means a fundamental transformation of the mind, a revolution of the soul. It is your psyche, infinitely wiser than your conscious ego, forcing a course correction. The first half of life is, by necessity, externally focused. It is about building a strong ego, adapting to the world, creating a persona, the social mask we wear to be accepted and functional. And you did that masterfully. You followed the script. The problem is that the soul is not satisfied with being just a good actress on the world's stage. A time comes when it demands that the script be burned and that your true nature take the leading role. The anguish you feel is the friction between the persona, which refuses to leave the stage, and the self, your true center, which emerges to reclaim your life. To call this a crisis is a lie we tell ourselves. To avoid facing the magnitude of what is really happening, a call to your own coronation. It is your soul saying, with a force that can no longer be ignored, until now, you have survived. From now on, we will live. The discomfort, the anxiety, the feeling that everything has lost its meaning, are not symptoms of a disease, but signs of an imminent birth. It is the pain of breaking the shell that protected a smaller version of you, so that the magnificent being you were born to be can finally emerge. To deny this process is to choose death in life, to condemn yourself to live as a ghost in the mansion you yourself have built. The task, therefore, is not to overcome the crisis, but to surrender to it with awareness and courage, allowing it to undo you completely so that you can be remade in a much more authentic and powerful way. The call is never a shout. It begins as the most subtle of whispers, an almost imperceptible dissonance in the symphony of your daily life. It is that moment of silence in the car, between one meeting and another, when an uncomfortable question floats in your mind. Is this all there is? It is the melancholy that assails you on a Sunday afternoon, even when everything is objectively fine. It is a feeling of being a stranger in your own story, an actor who has forgotten his lines and his purpose. The psyche, in its wisdom, sends its first messengers discreetly, testing your ability to listen. These messengers are dreams, memory lapses, synchronicities. You dream you are in your childhood home, but a room that never existed is there, with a locked door. You forget the name of a co-worker you see every day. You open a book at random, and the first sentence seems to be a direct answer to a question you didn't even know you had. Carl Jung taught that the unconscious is always communicating with us. trying to compensate for the one-sidedness of our conscious life. When we live excessively focused on the material, the logical, the external as the first half of life demands, the unconscious begins to send packages of information from the inner world, the world of the soul. These knocks on the door are invitations. The dream of the locked door is an invitation to explore parts of yourself that were sealed off long ago. The sudden forgetfulness is a sign that your psychic energy is withdrawing from an area of your life that no longer has vitality. Synchronicity is a nod from the universe, confirming that you are at an important threshold. The problem is that our ego, the master of rationality, is an expert at dismissing these signs. It catalogs them as stress, fatigue, coincidence. It builds a fortress of denial to protect the status quo, because the message these signs carry is inherently revolutionary. The life you are living is too small for the soul you carry. Ignoring these first calls comes at a very high cost. The whisper becomes a voice. The voice becomes a scream. And if the scream is ignored, the soul resorts to more drastic tactics: illness, depression, an accident, the loss of a job. These are the psychic earthquakes that come to demolish the structure that refuses to evolve. Recognizing the call is, therefore, an act of profound intelligence and self-compassion. It is to stop fighting the symptoms and start listening to the message they bring. It is to cultivate silence, pay attention to your dreams, notice the significant coincidences. It is to ask yourself the most important question one can ask at this stage of life: what in me is asking to live? In the journey of individuation, there is no territory more feared and more vital than the shadow. The shadow is our other self, our dark twin, the repository of everything we have repressed to become acceptable people. From childhood, we are taught to prune parts of ourselves: anger, aggression, sensuality, laziness, vulnerability, excessive ambition. Any trait that did not fit the mold of our family, culture, or religion was relegated to this psychic cellar. The fatal mistake is to believe that what is repressed disappears. In fact, the opposite happens. Everything we deny in ourselves does not die. It becomes autonomous. The psychic energy that should consciously feed these traits condenses in the unconscious, forming a powerful and often hostile complex. In the first half of life, the ego is strong enough to keep the cellar door locked. We spend an immense amount of energy maintaining our polished and coherent self-image. The problem is that, in midlife, the ego's energy naturally begins to wane, the cellar door begins to creak, and the things we locked in there are now banging, screaming, demanding to be seen. This is why, at this stage, you may find yourself exploding with rage over trivial matters. It is the repressed anger of a lifetime leaking through the cracks. You may feel attracted to people or situations that represent everything you have always despised. It is your projected shadow, trying to make itself known through others. You may be overcome by a paralyzing lethargy. It is the creative energy you never used, now stagnant and rotting. The confrontation with the shadow is the heroic act of the second half of life. It is Inanna's descent into the underworld, Daddy's journey through the inferno. It requires the courage to turn off the external light and light a small candle in your own darkness, looking at what lives there without judgment. What we discover, to our surprise, is that the shadow is not purely evil. As Jung stated, it is 90% pure gold. Hidden in the anger is your ability to set boundaries. In laziness, your need for rest and contemplation. In your repressed sensuality, your joy for life. The shadow contains your vitality, your authenticity, your connection to instinct. To ignore it is to live in anemic, two-dimensional life. The work of integrating the shadow is not to eliminate evil, but to bring these aspects into consciousness. It is to recognize, yes, this is also me. It is learning to give constructive expression to your anger, to honor your need for rest, to celebrate your passion. In doing so, you do not become a bad person, you become a whole person. And it is this wholeness that brings the true peace and power you have been seeking. The crisis only ends when you stop fighting your own darkness and start dancing with it. If the shadow is composed of what we have repressed, the unlived life is the melancholic territory of what we have simply abandoned. These are the roads not taken, the doors not opened, the vocations silenced in the name of reality. The artist who became a lawyer, the musician who became an accountant, the traveler who settled for a stable job. Each of these choices, often made out of necessity or fear, creates a psychic ghost, an echo of a potential self that continues to exist in the unconscious. In the first half of life, we are too busy building the life we have chosen to hear the laments of these ghosts. But in the lull of midlife, when external distractions diminish, their whispers become deafening. The weight you feel, this sense of diffuse and inexplicable regret, is the collective mourning for all the selves you let die. Jung saw this phenomenon as one of the main sources of neurosis in the second half of life. The psyche has an inherent purpose, a vocation, which is the realization of its totality. When we deny significant parts of our potential, we create an imbalance. The energy that should have been used to paint, compose, or explore does not disappear. It turns against us, manifesting as bitterness, cynicism, depression, or a fierce criticism of those who had the courage to live their dreams. This is why people in this phase often become harsh and resentful. They cannot bear to see in others the life they did not allow for themselves. The work here is not to drown in guilt or try to turn back time. That is impossible and useless. The task is to perform a ritual of mourning and rescue. First, mourning. One must look back with honesty and allow oneself to feel the pain of the losses, honoring the dreams that were sacrificed. Crying for these lost selves is a way of acknowledging their importance and validating their existence. Then, the rescue. You cannot go back and become a rock star at 50, but you can rescue the essence of that vocation. What was the musician in you really seeking? Expression, creativity, emotional connection? How can you bring that essence into your life now? Maybe it's learning to play the guitar on weekends. Maybe it's attending concerts. Maybe it's writing poetry. The goal is not to replicate the external form of the dream, but to integrate its soul energy into your current reality. In doing so, the ghosts do not disappear, but they are transformed. From haunting accusers, they become wise allies, sources of energy and inspiration. You begin to weave the golden threads of your unlived life into the fabric of your present life, creating a tapestry that is much richer, more colorful, and finally, complete. The cure for regret is not to forget, but to integrate. At the heart of the psyche, according to Jung, there's a fundamental polarity. Every man carries within him an archetypal image of the feminine, the anima, and every woman carries an archetypal image of the masculine, the animus. These are not literal representations of gender, but personifications of psychic qualities. The anima represents the principle of eros, the capacity for relatedness, intuition, connection with nature, creativity, and the world of feelings. The animus represents the principle of logos, clear thinking, structure, assertiveness, focus, and the capacity for action in the world. In the first half of life, to build our social gender identity, we tend to repress our inner counterpart. A man, to be masculine, often represses his vulnerability, his feelings, his intuition, his anima. A woman, to be feminine, frequently represses her assertiveness, her logical thinking, her ambition, her animus. The result is that we live as half-beings, disconnected from a vital source of power and wisdom. In midlife, the need to integrate this other half becomes urgent. The anima, or the animus, neglected for so long, begins to emerge from the unconscious in a chaotic way. For a man, an unintegrated anima manifests as irritability, inexplicable mood swings, sticky sentimentalism, or idealized projections onto real women, leading to extramarital affairs that are, in fact, a desperate search for his own lost feminine soul. For a woman, an unintegrated animus manifests as rigid and dogmatic opinions. I know everything. Destructive criticism, especially directed at herself, or a pursuit of power that is cold and disconnected from feelings. The call of midlife is for us to stop projecting this inner figure onto others, and to start relating to it within ourselves. For the man, this means having the courage to feel, to be vulnerable, to listen to his intuition, to connect with art and nature. It is learning to dance with his anima instead of being possessed by her. In doing so, he does not become less of a man, he becomes a complete man, capable of a depth of relationship and wisdom that logos alone could never achieve. For the woman, it means having the courage to express her opinions, to trust her thinking, to act with authority in the world, to pursue her goals without apology. It is learning to use the sword of her animus in service of the heart. In doing so, she does not become masculine, she becomes a powerful woman, capable of manifesting her wisdom in the world clearly and effectively. This integration is the coniunctio, the sacred inner marriage of alchemy. It is what allows for the birth of the divine child, a new, more whole and balanced consciousness. It is a process that softens the man's edges and strengthens the woman's spine, making both more fully human and prepared for the wisdom of old age. The ego is the center of our consciousness, the I with which we identify. It is the captain of the ship in the first half of our journey. Its function is to give us a sense of identity, to help us navigate the world, to make decisions, and to achieve goals. A strong and healthy ego is absolutely essential. The problem arises in midlife when the ego, which should only be the captain, begins to believe it owns the ship and the ocean itself. It completely identifies with its achievements, its roles, its beliefs. I am a doctor, I am a good father, I am a successful person. It builds a fortress of certainties and refuses to listen to any other voice, especially the deeper voice of the self, the true center of the psyche. The midlife crisis is, in essence, a mutiny orchestrated by the self. The self, the totality of our being, knows that the journey has changed direction. It is no longer about conquering the outer world, but about exploring the inner world. But the ego refuses to hand over the helm. It desperately clings to what it knows, to control, to the old map that is no longer useful for this new ocean. The death experienced in this phase is the death of this ego tyranny. It is not a physical death, but a psychological one, and it is just as terrifying. It is the dismantling of everything you thought you were. Your job, which defined your identity, may be lost or lose its meaning. Your marriage, which was the foundation of your life, may crumble. Your beliefs about the world and yourself are shaken to their foundations. It is an experience of free falling, of no longer knowing who you are. And this is precisely the point. The cup must be emptied so it can be filled with something new. The surrender of the ego is not an act of weakness, but of immense strength. It is the conscious decision to stop fighting, to let go of the helm, and to trust that there is a greater wisdom, the self guiding the ship. It is the humble recognition that I, the small conscious me, do not know the way. It is an act of faith in the process of your own soul. In practice, this translates into stopping to force solutions, accepting uncertainty, tolerating not knowing. It is trading the arrogance of control for the humility of listening. The paradox is that, in dying, the ego is not annihilated. It is transformed. It is reborn in its proper function, not as the tyrant king, but as the faithful servant of the self. It becomes the vehicle through which the deeper wisdom of the self can manifest in the world. This death and rebirth is the core of the initiation process. All heroic myths speak of it. One must descend into the underworld, be dismembered, to then be reborn as a more complete being. Your crisis is your initiation. The surrender of your ego is the price for your soul. The persona is the mask we present to the world. It is the collection of roles we play, the good professional, the dedicated father, the loving wife, the respectable citizen. The word comes from Latin and refers to the masks worn by actors in Greek theater. And that is its function. It is an interface, a tool for social adaptation. There is nothing inherently wrong with the persona. It is necessary for living in society. The deadly danger, however, is when we forget we are wearing a mask. It is when the actor believes he is the role he is playing. The first half of life is largely dedicated to building and perfecting this mask. We receive applause and rewards for it. The better our performance, the more success we achieve. The result is that, by midlife, many of us are completely identified with our persona. The problem is that, behind the mask, our true face, the self, is being suffocated. The psychic energy that should nourish the totality of our being is all channeled into maintaining this facade. The result is a growing sense of falsehood, exhaustion, and emptiness. You can have everything your persona desired: success, recognition, the perfect family, and still feel a deep hunger, a sense that you are living a fraud. This is the call to remove the mask. The midlife crisis is the moment when the mask begins to crack. Under the pressure of the emerging self, life events, a layoff, a divorce, an illness, often act as the hammer that shatters the facade. Suddenly, the role that defined you is taken away, and you are forced to ask, without this, who am I? At first, this experience is one of pure panic. Looking in the mirror and not recognizing the face behind the broken mask is disorienting. We feel shame for the parts of us that do not fit the idealized image we built: our shadow, our vulnerabilities, our unacceptable passions. The work of disidentification from the persona is a slow and delicate process. It begins with honest self-observation. It is noticing the moments when you act or speak not from your genuine feeling, but to please, to be accepted, to maintain the image. It is starting to say small no's when your soul wants to say no, and small yeses to the authentic desires you have always suppressed. It is risking being a little less perfect, a little less agreeable, and a little more real. The transition from the persona to the self does not mean you will become a hermit or a dysfunctional person. You will still have roles to play. The crucial difference is that now you know you are playing a role. You can put on and take off the mask as needed, without ever again confusing yourself with it. The center of your identity shifts from the external facade to the inner, unshakable core of the self. It is the difference between being the actor and being the director of your own play. This shift brings an indescribable freedom and peace. The energy that was spent maintaining the mask is now available for living, for creating, for relating authentically. You stop living for the audience and start living from your own truth. In a universe that the ego insists on seeing as mechanical and causal, synchronicity is the proof that another logic is in operation, the logic of the soul. Jung defines synchronicity as an acausal connecting principle, or more simply, a meaningful coincidence. It is not just any coincidence, like running into a friend at the supermarket. It is when an event in the outer world mirrors precisely and numinously an inner psychological state, without there being a causal connection between them. For example, you dream of a golden scarab beetle, and the next day, while telling the dream to your analyst, a very similar beetle taps on the office window. This is Jung's classic example. Or you are struggling with the decision to leave a job, and everywhere you turn, you start seeing the word leave or freedom on billboards, book covers, and in conversations you overhear. In the midlife journey, when the ego's map becomes useless, synchronicity emerges as the primary navigation tool. It is the language through which the self, or the universe, sends us signs, confirmations, and guidance. These events act like lighthouses in the fog, indicating that we are on the right path or warning us of a detour. They shatter our purely rational worldview and open us up to the dimension of mystery, showing that we are participating in a constant dialogue with something much larger than our small self. The ego tends to dismiss these events as just a coincidence because they threaten its dominance. To recognize synchronicity is to admit that we are not in total control, that there is a pattern of order and meaning that transcends our logical understanding. This is why the ability to perceive synchronicities increases dramatically during periods of great transformation, like the midlife crisis. When we are disoriented and open, our perception sharpens to these meaningful patterns. The work here is to cultivate an attitude of attention and reverence. One must be psychologically prepared to see the signs when they appear. This involves, first, being in touch with your inner state. If you don't know what you are feeling or thinking, you won't be able to recognize the mirroring in the outer world. Keeping a dream and reflection journal is a powerful practice for this. Second, adopting a posture of curiosity and openness, rather than skepticism. When a meaningful coincidence occurs, instead of dismissing it, ask yourself, what is the message here for me at this moment? Third, acting on the guidance received. Synchronicity is not just a phenomenon to be observed, it is an invitation to action. It illuminates the next step on the path. To live in a relationship with synchronicity is to live more poetically and magically. It is to feel part of a great web of meaning, where the inner and outer dance together. It is proof that you are not alone on your journey. The self, the great architect of your individuation, is constantly leaving a trail of breadcrumbs to guide you back home. Your only task is to keep your eyes and your heart open. The ancient alchemists, under the guise of transforming base metals into gold, were in fact mapping the process of psychological transformation, individuation. Jung recognized in alchemy the perfect metaphor for the soul's journey. Lead, the prima materia raw material, is nothing other than the initial psychic state of the midlife crisis, the confusion, the depression, the suffering, the confrontation with the shadow. It is the undifferentiated, heavy mass of your pain. The alchemist does not discard the lead. He welcomes it into the Athener, the hermetically sealed vessel, which is a symbol for introspection and inner work. The first stage of the alchemical work is the nigredo, the blackening. It corresponds to the descent into the unconscious, the confrontation with the shadow, the death of the ego. It is a period of dissolution, where all that was solid melts away. It is the dark night of the soul, a state of depression and despair, where it seems there is no hope. Most people flee at this stage, but the alchemist knows that one must endure the fire, keep the suffering contained in the vessel, for the transformation to occur. This is what a psychotherapist does, helps the patient to cook in their own suffering, without escaping into distractions. After the nigredo comes the albedo, the whitening. This is the stage of insight and purification. After confronting the shadow, we begin to differentiate things. The light of consciousness begins to penetrate the darkness. It is when we separate what is ours from what we project onto others. It is a moment of clarity, of washing, where the soul, after its baptism by fire, emerges clean and renewed. Duality, light, shadow, masculine, feminine, is recognized and understood. Next comes the citrinitas, the yellowing. Associated with the rising sun, it is the emergence of a new light, the light of wisdom. It corresponds to the birth of the inner sage. The consciousness that emerges here is not the naive consciousness of youth, but a consciousness that has passed through darkness and integrated it. It is the wisdom that comes from having known and accepted the totality of oneself. Finally comes the rubedo, the reddening. It is the culmination of the work. It is the union of opposites, the coniunctio. It is the final integration of the conscious and the unconscious, the masculine and the feminine, the human and the divine. The result is the lapis philosophorum, the philosopher's stone, which symbolizes the realized self. It is a state of wholeness, of totality, where the individual becomes who they truly are. Life does not become perfect, but the person now lives from a stable and authentic center. The midlife crisis, seen through this lens, ceases to be a personal catastrophe and becomes your great work. Your suffering is your raw material. Your courage to face yourself is the fire, and the result is the gold of individuation, a more conscious, complete personality capable of living with purpose and meaning. What, after all, is the purpose of this arduous and often painful journey? It is not, as our youth-obsessed culture suggests, to fix yourself to become productive and happy again in the mold of the first half of life. The goal is not to go back. The purpose is to give birth to a new archetype within you, the archetype of the sage. The first half of life is dominated by the archetypes of the hero and the innocent. The hero seeks to conquer the world, prove his worth, slay dragons. The innocent seeks security and happiness in an idealized world. Both are necessary in their time. But in the second half of life, these archetypes become exhausted. To continue living as a hero leads to burnout and meaninglessness. To continue as an innocent leads to bitterness and denial of reality. The psyche demands a new ruling figure. The sage is not interested in conquering the world, but in understanding it. He does not seek happiness, but meaning. His primary tool is not the sword, but the mirror. He does not fight against the darkness, for he knows it is the other half of the light. He does not fear death, for he understands it as part of the cycle of life. The birth of the inner sage is marked by several shifts in perspective. First, there is a shift from doing to being. Personal worth is no longer measured by productivity and external achievements, but resides in the quality of your consciousness and the depth of your being. Second, there is a growing detachment from outcomes. The sage acts in the world, but his inner peace does not depend on the success or failure of his actions. He does what needs to be done with integrity and lets go of the result. Third, there is an expansion of compassion. Having faced and integrated his own shadow, the sage becomes less judgmental towards others. He recognizes the same struggle between light and darkness in every human being, which makes him more tolerant and loving. Fourth, and most importantly, there is a connection to the transpersonal. The sage understands that his individual life is part of something much larger, the flow of history, the collective unconscious, the mystery of the cosmos. This brings a sense of purpose that is not egocentric. Life is no longer about me, but about how I can serve the whole, how I can pass on the wisdom I have acquired. Reaching this point is not the end of the journey, but the beginning of a new way of living. It is living with inner authority, rooted in your own center. It is being able to offer a blessing to the world, not from a desire to be applauded, but from the fullness of your own being. Your crisis, your pain, your dismemberment, all of it was the price of admission to this stage of life. It was your initiation. And the wisdom you now carry is the gift you bring back from the underworld, not just for yourself, but for us all.